All right, guys, welcome back to the Inting podcast. Today we have a very special guest. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Gio. Should I say what I do? I'm a Valorant caster, or I've casted many things, but these days I'm most known for Valorant, and I do a lot of content creation as well.
Oh, yeah. That's why I've seen you like around a lot of the VCT sphere. So that's how I have found you. But if you want to let's start in the beginning, have you worked at anything else before Valorant, or was this like your first real like esports?
No, this was not my first release sport. I think over time I've worked, I've never actually counted it, but I've definitely worked in a lot of games. We're talking like at least over 10 different games. But if you want to talk about the actual games that I have like spent a significant amount of time in, I would probably put that down to 3, which would be Overwatch, Rainbow Six Siege, and Valorant as the ones where I've quite like seriously made a name for myself, if that makes sense. But I've done like random stuff here and there in like a ton of other games as well. So yeah, this is not my first.
So how has it been like compared to like other games? You say you worked on Overwatch and Rainbow, and how has Valorant been different compared to those other games, like community wise, staff, co-workers, like all that? How has that been?
This is where I say everything's been awful and everyone hates me. No, that's not true. I mean, I really, really love Valorant. I love the people that I've gotten to work with in Valorant. I really enjoyed the fact that like infrastructurally, it has been really, really strong pretty much from the get-go. And so that's made it so there's been a lot of really interesting things to do. You know, my very first Valorant cast was like some monthly thing, I think. And then I got to do like Masters Berlin like a couple months later. So I've kind of done a lot of different levels of things in Valorant, and I think all of them have been done really well. I think that the game was made with esports in mind. So that's made a lot of things very easy. And the people that I've been able to work with in Valorant, like both from the talent side and also like the Riot side with production and just everything like managerial, there's so much passion in it, which like is really, really nice. That's not to say, of course, that there isn't passion in other games, of course, but I think that was something that really kind of like lit a spark in me regarding working with Riot specifically, as I really kind of felt that very strongly. You know, and it was interesting working in other games because they were also in other times. Like when I first started working in Overwatch, this is the tail end of 2018. And I think esports as a space was very different back then as well. I think that if I reflect on how I felt, for example, as a woman working in esports, I actually see a lot of difference, even if at the time I didn't necessarily like acknowledge that as much. And that's only something I've been able to really like acknowledge in recent times, particularly. And I felt like I had to kind of fight a little bit harder to be taken seriously for what I wanted to do, because back then was sort of the era of people started wanting to specifically hire women, which meant that you were, as a woman, kind of pushed towards certain broadcast roles, and those were not necessarily the roles I wanted to do. And so I really sort of felt like I had to make people take me seriously, whereas these days I don't think that's really the case. I think you're sort of taken seriously by default. And even though that's only a short period of time where that change has happened, it's still something that's really notable, and I'm glad to see. That wasn't necessarily a problem with like Blizzard particularly or Overwatch particularly. It was just more like a cultural thing in esports in general. So as I was trying to get experience doing other things at the same time as being in Overwatch, that was something that I was like noticing a lot. So you know, people ask me a lot, especially on Instagram, like, oh, you know, do you prefer working in Valorant? Do you prefer working in Rainbow Six? And it's like, well, there are things I love about working in all of them. Otherwise, I wouldn't have worked in them. Yeah. And the reason I left Rainbow Six was because the league that I was casting ceased to exist. So it wasn't like I had this huge flame out or an issue with Ubisoft and like slammed the door and walked away. So I don't have any bad blood with anyone or anything like that. But I have definitely had like a really positive experience working in every scene that I've been in.
For sure. I feel like each esport has like their own plus and minuses, of course. because I know like Valorant, like now it's like more. They're definitely like putting more emphasis now on the female, like the game changers. Now I think Riot was like really the first real. Like Valorant was the first real game to really put a lot of emphasis on the female. I know CS:GO had it back then, but I feel like they never really put as much emphasis as in the Valorant scene. And
I think in CS it's a bit different anyway. And like I'm going to talk as somebody who has never really been involved in the CS scene. But in CS it's kind of different because you don't have that like centralized sort of platform in the same way that you do in Valorant. Like Valorant has always been run by Riot. And so the decisions of what like leagues there are going to be and where investment goes, that has always been centrally made by Riot. Whereas in CS, it's kind of like Valve approve things, but they don't make they don't run a league themselves. So it's kind of like, well, if a TO wants to run a league for women, they're welcome to. But Valve aren't necessarily going to do that themselves. So that's been a lot more on like whether there were TOs who even wanted to do that, or whether there were like small companies who wanted to run a tournament for women. So it's kind of hard to compare directly. And the fact that there was a women's scene where we can talk about players and their histories in CS, despite of that fact, I think that is actually quite a positive thing, even if something akin to game changers never really existed. I mean, I suppose you could compare it to currently ESL Impact, but I think it's still fair to say that game changers is kind of like on a different level to that. So yeah, but there is like that difference there.
For sure. I feel like, Valve has always had that thing where like, oh, we don't really touch any of the esports unless the major. I think that's like their crown jewel where that's the only time of the year where they only invest in. Because I know there's the Impact series. I have a friend, she explained about it, where it's like the Impact series where like they actually put a lot of emphasis now on the female side. I feel like they only really started doing that because they saw how Valorant and Riot was doing about the game changers. And like how they're putting more emphasis now. There's like LAN events. Champions just recently happened, which is, by the way, was a great event. I was watching the whole thing. It was amazing. And I feel like Valve is kind of shooting themselves in the foot by just not having big events like that, and not especially having it like be emphasized. Even though like they're not involved, I feel like TO should be involved as well, because I know game changers like Valorant was one of the leading spears. I know it had a lot of controversies with a lot of players, but I feel like overall they've really like did a good job in putting emphasis on the female side. And I feel like other esports have not really done that. Where like I think like I don't really remember. I don't know. Do you remember if like Rainbow actually had any of that sense, like any pro female side?
I don't think Rainbow Six ever did.
Yeah, I feel like that's also a big issue as well. I feel like people don't understand that, and there's also like. I feel like a lot of just the community as well. I feel like Valorant, like, let's be serious, the Valorant community is not the best. If we can agree on that when it comes to, not like the content creators or like the TOs, more of just like the Redditors and all them.
Okay, I will interrupt here. I'm going to interrupt here.
Yes.
Like I said, I've been in a lot of games. Every community thinks their community is the worst community. And when you've worked in as many games as I have at this point, you kind of learn to throw away those comments, because what you just said, I'm going to say this in the nicest way possible. What you just said doesn't mean anything, because the next game along says the same thing about themselves, and the next game along says the same things about themselves. Yeah. And to be perfectly honest with you, Valorant is not that bad as far as like toxic communities or Reddit or whatever, anything like that goes. I actually think Valorant's pretty good as far as things go.
They are very young.
I have seen much worse. And so I think a lot of people like to say that about the community that they're in, almost in a self-deprecating way, and almost in like a kind of, oh, I'm going to put this out there before I say something else sort of way. But usually it is kind of embellishment or hyperbole, and not really that close to the truth. There is always more toxic, and I mean, I think even when you're talking about discussions within the community, like League of Legends is infinitely worse than Valorant is.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And I don't even think League is anywhere near the worst. Yeah, I mean, famously, Gears of War always gets like the crown for being the worst and stuff like that. I actually think Rainbow Six has become pretty bad for those things because
Really?
the Rainbow Six community is so defeatist. And you could say anything remotely positive around Rainbow Six, and they're going to be there to tell you the Rainbow Six is the worst game that ever existed, and the game is dying. It's like, well, what are you doing then? Like, why are you still here? So I actually think Valorant is pretty good as far as those things go, and I tend not to get too engaged in conversations that involve like, well, the community is not the best, because I think as soon as you start talking about the community being bad, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and it becomes a feedback loop that benefits nobody.
Well, I also do feel like Riot has done a really good job in stepping in as well to handle the community, because I feel like they've definitely saw how bad League was in their community when it comes to like toxicity, just like overall, just like the entry level. Because if you're a new player and you're into League, like I tried League for the first time, I think 2 months ago. I've never played League. I've tried it for the first time, and
it's not very accessible.
Oh no, it's so bad because like I wouldn't know what to build, so I'm using the recommending system, and they're like, "Why are you building that?" And I'm getting flamed 5 minutes into the game, and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So it's definitely like Valorant has definitely brought that. It's easier to. I mean, of course, as agents come out, map will of course it's gonna get harder to entry, but I feel like the community is definitely better. Don't be wrong, it's definitely like better when it comes to entry, because I'll play Rainbow for the first time, or I've been playing Rainbow, but if I play Rainbow for the first time, I'll get flamed for not picking the right agent, the right gun, the right holo sight.
Right?
Know?
Yeah, no, I would not ever recommend anybody play Rainbow Six on their own when they're learning Rainbow Six. Like, get yourself a 5-stack.
Get like a 5-stack, or like get a duo or somebody that actually knows the game, because they'll end up they'll like walk you through it. I feel like with those kind of games, it's definitely hard to it's definitely a hard entry for it. I feel like CSGO is surprisingly, it's actually very easy to get into. It's just very simple. You get a gun, you go shoot, plant the bomb, or kill all the people. Very simple.
Yeah.
Rainbow Six, okay, you have to learn about verticality, you have to learn about holo sight, you have to learn about agents.
The map changes in every single game because it's like destructible. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like definitely like some games like that is definitely a lot of, the entry potential is a lot. And it's I feel like that's when the community comes in and it's like, okay guys, this is how you do it. I feel like Valorant has actually produced a lot of like content creators who are very beginner friendly, where they'll tell you, okay guys, this is how you do it. Or like the how do you say, like, not the Twitter coaches, but like, do you know Metafly? Like where they're yes, where there a lot of Valorant coaches are from there, and they'll teach some players who are brand new to FPS. I feel like Valorant has definitely introduced a lot of people who are new to attack FPS. And what do you think about like those like Metafly coaches who are essentially like their living is teaching players new FPS?
I mean, I think it's fine. Like there are some people who are very, I guess, gatekeepy and will be like, oh, that you're not a real coach. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, you're probably not going to be jumping in to coach a VCT team anytime soon. But like, it's fine. Like, it's, for lack of a better term, that's just like a free market within the game, right? Like, if there are people who are willing to pay for that service and you will provide the service, it's not hurting anyone, cool, go for it. Like, great. Like, I don't have a problem with that. I think that if that is how a bronze player wants to learn to get to gold, okay. And you know, if there are any that happen to be good enough that can coach you higher than that, and like, there are going to be people whose like YouTube channels are about the same thing. Even if you can't necessarily directly hire them as a one-to-one coach, like they still provide the same sort of service. That's fine. And in my opinion, that's kind of the sign of a healthy ecosystem, right? Because you know, there are all these different moving parts. People are participating in the game and its culture in different ways, and they're offering something different to the community, and they're offering something that there are parts of the community that want that. I don't have an issue with that. I think anything like that is totally fine.
But I feel like this is like kind of new, like these Metafly coaches, because I remember before COVID, like I have never really seen any like one-on-one coaches, or like you either just play the game or you just YouTube, all right, how do you play this agent? And there's like a YouTube video. So I feel like these one-on-one coaches, like it's definitely new. And I feel like for a lot of younger audiences who want to eventually go pro, this is good. And I understand that, but I feel like if you're just like more of a ranked, I feel like just go play the game. I don't know if just because of how essentially gamers are raised. It's not a bad thing. I'm not saying they're a bad thing. It's just interesting.
I'm very laissez-faire about anything like that, because for me, I'm like, just if that's what you've decided is the right decision for you or the right way to do it for you, then cool. Like, absolutely, you could just go like grind ranked, but yeah, I mean, actually, to be honest with you, I think that if I were the sort of person who, if I didn't have like a really close connection to like the world of competitive gaming and I were bronze and I wanted to get to like plat or whatever, me as a human being would probably actually do better to have someone directly coach me than to just go and play ranked. Like, I would play ranked, but just I'm a very academic person. I do well if there's something specific that I can like study and it's like a structured environment. Yeah. I don't do as well as a human if it's just kind of like go learn from experience. And actually, generally, like in the games that I have gotten better at and ranked higher in, it has been because of my casting and my exposure to, so it's weird because I will learn the game to a really high level to be a caster. I won't be able to replicate that. I'll be like terrible in the game. And then as time goes on, I'll just gradually get better because I'm casting it. Whereas me just having that knowledge in the first place actually hasn't been enough, because it's more about like applying it and that works differently for different people. And so I think actually when I put myself in that situation, I would probably also learn better if someone was specifically coaching me. Now, I have never like hired a personal coach. I just don't care enough about being good at the game to do anything like that. I have like better things to do. I would rather watch other people play the game and be able to talk about that. That's obviously why I do what I do. But yeah, I just think I don't really like concern myself with like how people learn the game or what they do to get there, as long as they're not cheating. Like,
yeah,
cool,
that's a big thing.
Yeah, that's like the thing everyone can agree, well, most people can agree on, right? Is like, yeah, as long as you're not like installing wall hacks, you get better however you see fit.
For sure. Of course, there's also that big, like, I always see on my Twitter feed where someone's getting exposed for getting boosted and all that. And that, I feel like something like that, you can't really, like, you can try to avoid, but, like, that's something that's always going to be inevitable. Someone's always going to be duoing with somebody, or, like, you can also play with somebody who is just infinitely better than you, but you're just also, like, enjoying their company. What is your opinion on, like, people getting exposed for boosting, and, like, how would you think, like, it would change, you would change it?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I think that if you're boosting in ranked, then it has to be deliberate, right? Like, you don't accidentally queue with, you know, it's not just like, oh, but I want to play with this pal and they're so much better than me, because it's ranked, and ranked is designed to negate that. If it's like unrated, that's kind of different. Like, one of my best friends who I love playing with is just much better than me at video games. Like, he's just one of those people. And like, we can have a fairly even game. Like, you know, it's not going to come across like he's wrecking everyone and I'm like this sorry ass that's being dragged along. But I will only ever play with him and unrated. I think that, yeah, like, I don't know, like when it comes to specifically being boosted, it's like, it sucks to play against Smurfs. Like, I think anybody can attest to the fact that it sucks to play against Smurfs. And that's why the kind of system in League of Legends is quite good, where like if it recognizes you as a Smurf, it'll put you in Smurf queue. Beyond that, I kind of don't really know what the answer is, or even, I don't know. It's hard because, like I said, I'm somebody who is quite good at just accepting the state of whatever the video game is, and just being like, this is the game. Like, I'm the same with it's not exactly the same, but like when new patches come out, obviously as a caster, you should learn them or know what's going on. And a lot of people theory craft like what they think the next meta is going to be based on a patch, right? I am never interested in that shit, because I'm like, for me, it's like, I don't care to predict what's going to happen. you give me a game, you put a game in front of me, and I will learn it, and I will care about that game. And it's why I never complain about metas either. Like, there have been metas in games that I've worked in before that people have had very strong negative opinions on. And for me, I just never get that riled about it, because I'm like, I just want to be able to analyze what's in front of me. I don't really care about it changing. Like, and it's kind of the same here a little bit. And I think because I'm not like a ranked demon, the topic of boosting and smurfing and stuff like that, it's stuff that I sort of like have an opinion on the periphery, and I'm sort of like, yeah, smurfing is bad, boosting is not good, but I don't like have a really deep opinion on it, because it's just not something I concern myself with that much.
For sure. I 100% understand. And with boosting, of course, because they'll eventually start solo queuing, and then essentially it's like a 4v5. Because imagine if someone who's gold initially goes and ranks up to Ascendant in Valorant, and then like they get boosted and they're just solo queue. It's just like, it's a completely different thing, because you don't have that trusty duo who's always just going to be your assurance if you decide to solo queue.
You either like D-rank like crazy, or you just learn the hard way.
Exactly.
You know, like, one of the two is going to happen.
For sure. And I've always been the thing of, I'd rather deal with a smurf 10 out of the 10 times instead of a cheater. Because at least with a smurf, they could possibly because with a smurf, they could have a bad game and you could still win it. With a cheater,
at least I'm playing against the human being.
Yeah, like at least I'm playing against a human being, not a bot. So that's also the biggest thing, where I feel like people like always complain, like, oh, smurfs, but like, people understand, like, when you play CS matchmaking, every other game there's a cheater. There's walls, there's aimbot. It's bad. I don't know how it is in Rainbow. I don't know if the cheating is pretty bad in Rainbow, but when it came to like CS, it's kind of bad.
On the Rainbow Six subreddit and see what they say.
Oh no, I don't want to get flamed and like
cheating's so bad in Rainbow Six. Cheating is very bad in Rainbow Six.
Really bad? Okay, because that's also the thing. Because I know there's FPL. There's like Face It, I think, in Rainbow.
Yeah.
So that's also a big help. But I feel like Riot is doing something where like no game is really done, because FPL and like all that is a third-party system, not by the main company, so not by Ubisoft, not by Valve. It's a third-party company. But with Riot, it's like, no, we want to make our own homegrown anti-cheat with the root kernel. So I know when the game first came out, Riot was like, yeah, we have a root kernel anti-cheat. And then everyone's like, I don't want them to access my computer. But I'm like, I was one of the only people at first. I was like, honestly, I'd rather have that, because I don't want a cheater every other game. What was your opinion when you first heard about the root kernel? And like, do you think more games should be more like video games?
Yeah, but for me, to be honest, I didn't really care. Like, I was kind of like, yeah, I'm going to install the game. So, you know, I do. It's obviously a difficult one, because for me, like, now that Valorant's kind of existed and we're all used to Vanguard and stuff, like, it's very easy to be like, oh yeah, well, you know, Rainbow Six, they should just make like a kernel level anti-cheat, right? And it's a very easy thing to say, but it's also understandable why a lot of game companies are reluctant to do that, or why they don't want to, and they don't want to kind of like lose trust with their consumer base. And it's hard to really tell what the answer is there, because I would assume that when game companies make the decision to not do that, it is after doing a lot of research and consultation about sort of forward forecasting what they think their consumer base is going to react like. And it could be that for Riot, they knew that they were a big enough behemoth of a game developer that actually it would not matter, and that positive sentiment would eventually override negative sentiment and start to switch the minds of the people who had negative sentiment. So it could be that. Whereas like a smaller games company may look at it and be like, we don't have like an omnipotent enough loyal user base to guarantee that sentiment is going to change amongst them, and we may lose consumers. That is me entirely speculating. I don't know, but I know that generally in business, big decisions aren't made without consultation, you know, and without research. So that is kind of my assumption. But it would not surprise me if we do see this kind of thing be implemented a little more in the future, especially after having Valorant as a case study. And I think ultimately, like, people are happy with the outcome. They're obviously really happy with like the level of cheating or lack thereof in Valorant. And so they can reap the rewards from it. But I think part of it is that argument that, you know, as a user, like, are you fully aware of what level of security you've given up in order to have that? And I would probably assume that most users don't. I don't. Like, I know that they have, like, I'm like, okay, well, I don't have anything to hide, so I don't have a problem with this. But, like, realistically, I'm not a computer science person. I don't really know what it is the Riot actually have access to of mine. I'm just sort of like, yeah, it's fine. And I think that's probably what makes people reluctant to start implementing it because, as the user, you can absolutely consent to having that. And we all love the outcome of it. And we're so happy. But it's like, do people actually really know what they've given up? And it sort of reminds me of like when do you remember like the whole thing when it was first announced that like you were gonna have to like accept cookies on every single website and everyone like lost their minds over it. And like in reality, it's mostly just really annoying. But like
it's not a bad thing.
It was a huge deal because like people had previously not had to do that. And it was the sort of argument was like, okay, well, yes, it's obviously really convenient that you don't have to do that, but are you aware of what security you've given up by not doing that? And that was and the reason that they had to start asking for that permission on all websites was because they had to make it more clear that people were giving up certain security measures and stuff like that. So there's that kind of balance there, and I suspect that's a really big part of it. But for me personally, I'm like, I don't have a problem with it. For sure.
I feel like, I feel like Valorant right now they're like definitely testing the waters, and they're definitely taking a big risk with this. And I feel like the outcome has always been good, because I've heard like pros from other games trying Valorant. I'm like, it's convenient. It's like, why don't they have a root kernel anti-cheat? Why do they have to download FPL, ESEA, all that in order for them to get anti-cheat? And it's like, I think other game companies I feel like they're not scared, but they don't want to risk something that they could potentially lose as well for something like that. And I feel like Riot's they're like, you know what? I feel like let's take the risk. You know what? Let's do something innovative. Let's be that first real game
because obviously,
developer.
like, if it fucks up, you lose all like public trust as well. And so, yeah, there's definitely like, it's a balancing act for the developer as well, who, you know, have to be really sure that their product is like not gonna do that and bring the whole company down.
For sure, because I think of Valorant, I think they were like, it was like 5 years before the announcement video, they were starting development of it. So like they had definitely 5 years where they're like, okay, let's really sit down and think, do we want a root kernel anti-cheat, or do we want to go the same route as like Rainbow and CSGO? Do we want to go that route and like have a third-party anti-cheat, or do we want to homegrown our thing? And I feel like, I mean, with the result, you can clearly see it's great. There's there's much less. I think my 3 years of playing Valorant, I think I've had no more than 10 cheaters. My whole 3 times.
I've never had a cheater in a game.
Never. So you've never gotten the red screen, or you've never like seen blatant cheater?
I've seen screenshots of it, but I've never had it myself.
What? The whole 3 years of you play? That's insane. So like, is it because of is it a server thing, a region thing, or?
I don't know. It might be because I don't play a lot of ranked in Valorant. Like, and also I will say that ever since I started casting, especially like professionally at the beginning of 2019, I play competitive video games not a ton. Like I go through phases where I'm like, oh my god, I just want to grind it out, and I'll play a bunch in a short space of time. But for a lot of my time, I don't play it because I'm kind of like I kind of said earlier, I see my time as better spent like watching tournaments and then making content and researching stuff and whatever, which is more valuable to me than like me trying to get better. Like my skill is fairly irrelevant for my job. And oftentimes what happens is, you know, I spend a lot of time at the computer doing that stuff, and then in the evening when I'm done, like I'm like too tired to want to concentrate on a competitive game, you know? So I go through my waves with it where it's like, you know, sometimes I'm really, really in the mood and then sometimes I'm not. But yeah, I don't play video games as much as people may think in the last few years. So that's probably part of it. You probably have a lot more hours in Valorant than I do.
Yeah. And you probably, you know, touch grass on like most of the Valorant community.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's that as well. But I know because
I have to touch grass.
because I know that's also a running gag with the Valorant community. You'll see someone who's like level 900 in Valorant, and it's like, this man was before grass was invented. So it's definitely interesting like that. Well, bouncing off the topic of that, we've had previous casters on, and we've also asked them, do you think that rank matters when it comes to casting? When it comes to like casting? Because I know that's sometimes a big topic.
I made a whole last video about this like a couple of months ago.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I made a video that was called something like "Should Casters Be High Elo?" And it was like a full-on video essay, and like I basically wrote it as a whole essay on my computer and just basically read the essay as the video.
For sure.
And my short answer is no, your rank doesn't matter as a caster. And there are a few different reasons that I broke down in the video. One being that your knowledge actually isn't the most important thing as a broadcaster. But even if you wanted to assume that your knowledge is the most important thing as a broadcaster, you being high rank does not actually mean that you will have that knowledge. Like, if you compared a ranked game to a pro game, it's a different game. Like, it's just different. Like, it's not the same game. So you being able to play in like Immortal or like Ascendant or whatever, like it's not. It's just a different game. Like it
Sure.
actually is. You have to learn it differently, and there's a huge thing in competition. This is not just video games, this is any sport, where like the relationship of the team is such a monumental part of how the game is played as that team and how people perform as the team. Whereas typically, like in solo queue, well, you're solo queuing, right? So you're on your own. And so like that, like things like communication, synergy, IGLing, anything like that, they are not components in a ranked game. Unless you're in a 5-stack, but even then, that's typically not going to be a team that you are consistently playing with. So these huge parts of competitive sport are not even a part of the ranked like experience. And so you just can't, your performance in ranked just can't even translate into your understanding of a pro game. Now you can obviously gain things from it, like things like and this kind of just comes from being familiar with the game, but like things like certain interactions in the game. For example, like the turret bug thing from Champions. A lot of people knew why that went that way because they've witnessed it in their own ranked games, right?
Sure.
So it's kind of like things like that. You kind of come to know interactions and what the mechanical requirements to achieve certain things in the game are, and you can gain an appreciation for that sort of thing. But I don't think you need to be a high elo to learn those sorts of things. I think you just need to be someone who plays the game. And then the other thing on top of that is, in order to have a high knowledge of anything, you don't need to have a practical knowledge of it. And the example I always use is my degree, my bachelor's degree, is in theoretical physics.
Oh, wow.
I'm qualified to tell you how a Hadron Collider works, even though I've never worked at a Hadron Collider. I specifically did theoretical physics, right? It's like I literally studied the theory of it because I fucking hate doing practical. I hate experiments and all of that stuff. Like, that is not for me in science. But it's like, I am qualified to tell you how those things work. I can tell you how an airplane works. I can draw an aileron, and I can never pronounce that word properly. And I can show you how air moves past it and explain the mechanics of how it stays in the air. Can I fly a fucking plane? No, I can't. For me, it is so blindingly obvious that there is a difference between practical experience and theoretical knowledge, and that you don't need one for the other. and that different people learn in different ways and can provide value and insight and knowledge regardless of the way they gained that knowledge. Now, the one difference is that having like ex-pros or even current pros providing some sort of insight can give you something that someone like me, who has never been a pro, can't. But usually the difference in that insight is not actually about the specifics of how the game plays. Like, my knowledge on how Valorant plays is going to be, to all intents and purposes, the same as theirs because it's the same game. Like, it's not like we're talking about a different game. But I can't tell you from my personal experience what it's like in, for example, attack timeout. I can't tell you the sorts of conversations that my coaches have with me. I can't tell you what the scrim environment is like because I've never had that. So like, a pro can provide certain value that that somebody who hasn't been a pro certainly can, but it's not necessarily to do with the knowledge of the game itself. And even then, that is nothing to do with being good in ranked. So it's still separate from just being someone with high elo. So yeah, I got a little bit passionate about that, but
no, for sure.
Over the course of my career, it's definitely something that's come up a lot. I remember when I first started casting in Rainbow Six, there were people who were very unhappy that I'd been hired because I wasn't high elo. And I got to a decent elo in Rainbow Six, but like, when I began, I wasn't. And it was very frustrating to try and convince people that actually that wasn't really relevant. But I think people use it as a scapegoat because it's an easy seal of approval. And also because people hold their own elo in high regard, they hold the elo of others in high regard and kind of forget the fact that it actually isn't indicative of what matters here. And it also generally shows the fact that they just don't understand what's important on broadcast.
For sure. I feel like that is also something that a lot of people like, that flies over their head when it comes to that. And that's also a thing where I feel like a lot of people are still new to esports and people don't understand that, because of course people who've been in esports understand, okay, you know, someone could be bottom fragging, but it's not, it's like kills don't matter. Maybe they're the IGL or like the IGL, or they're like support, or like the role players. They're not meant to be getting kills. They're meant to be just supporting their team. And I feel like a lot of players don't understand that. And I feel like that's where the casters come in and they explain that.
Yeah, I would love to interject there as well, because that's something that I think really, because that's something I've thought about a lot, is like the fact that people put so much stock in that specifically. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that the environment of playing video games competitively for most people, so like ranked, is a solo endeavor. So they, you know, their experience of playing ranked and playing the game is about their own performance and having affirmation of that. So when you get your stats at the end of the game, like, they want to see that they've played well. And so that leads people to project that onto players when they are watching the competitive game. Whereas if you compare it to, like, I don't know, like, you're a kid who is really passionate about soccer.
You can say football, it's okay.
Yeah, you might know what I mean, but if most of your audience are American, I usually just like try to translate. But like, they're really passionate about soccer. Like, they might be able to practice kind of like technical skills on their own, but they can't actually play soccer on their own. They have to play it as a team.
For sure.
There's no other option. That's how the game works. So when they are growing up and they're playing it, and it's like, okay, maybe they're like a defender, they're not a striker, so they're not going to be scoring goals. Like, they don't grow up with this idea that, like, oh my god, I have to be the one that's scoring goals, otherwise, like, I'm useless. Like, they grow up with this ingrained idea that no, they are just contributing to the team, and their role allows the team to flourish. And you can translate that to any sport. It's kind of like in football, like, not everyone is going to be the quarterback, right?
Yeah.
Like, you need all of these, like, people, like, all of the fucking people on the defense who, like, don't get talked about, like, the sun shines out of their ass in the same way that the offense do, right?
Yes,
so, like, that is something that when you are growing up playing those sports, you know that from a very young age. Whereas with video games, it's kind of like you have no reason for that to be ingrained in you, because the way that the game is and the way that the game is designed is about that one person doing as well as they can. They want to be the star player because that's how the game rewards you. And because that's how the game gets you to play more, right? Mm-hmm. That's just kind of how it works. And so that means that when you see people playing competitively, you don't automatically necessarily like interpret the fact that there are these players who don't, their KD is negative and they haven't like not as much numerically. You don't automatically assume like, oh, but it's because their role allows them to set up for team success. Mm-hmm. There is someone who, maybe it's their role to pop off, and my role or this guy's role is to set that guy up. Like, because that's not the lens through which they have played the game. And if they've played like 3,000 hours of the game and they've only ever seen it through this one way, that's kind of understandable. And I don't think there's an easy fix for that, just because that is how video games work. But I think that's a big reason why people see it that way. For sure.
No, you've worded that perfectly. And I also feel like esports has definitely grown so much. The thing is, before COVID, esports was like still looked at okay, but then I feel like after COVID, esports took that huge leap, and now it's also broadcasted. Like before, you saw Overwatch being sported on ESPN, and I feel like now more and more people are more exposed to it. So it's definitely like more people are like getting into the game, and they're now a lot of newer ones. I feel like the people who comment like, oh, for example, FNS, why is he bottom fragging? But people understand he has a shot call. He has to make sure all his teammates around him are doing everything.
FNS is one of the most valuable players in America, and like, you're wondering why he's bottom fragging?
That's like, people don't understand. It's like he has to macro manage his entire team. He has to know what the other team is doing. So kills is his last thing that he has to worry about. Now people like don't understand that, but like people understand that FNS is one of the best, like a top 3 IGL in the world, and people don't understand that, where he is like genuinely a big impact. And I feel like now with that's why a lot of content creators, I feel like, and a lot like you guys, the casters as well, I feel like you guys do a wonderful job in expressing that. It's like, hey, he might not be doing kills, but like his shot calling has been out of this world. His reads of the map has been out of this world. And I also have a question: do you guys usually talk to the players and try to get their insight as well, or is this more of just like you just watching the game so much you understand that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of talent try to talk. They might talk to players. I think usually the prime target is coaches and support staff, because they can give you a bit about like what they're kind of aiming for, and insights in a lot of the behind the scenes. But like people absolutely talk to players. Anything like that, like especially around big events. And oftentimes in a big event, like you have more of a chance of actually speaking to them in person as well. Like you don't just have to try and like send some Discord message or whatever. But yeah, it's not like all the time, but it does. Absolutely, it happens. Yeah.
Yeah. So far, I know you were like at Berlin when it came to the Game Changers. Were you talking to some of the pros and like trying to get their insight?
I wasn't in Berlin for Game Changers.
Oh, you weren't in but you were.
I wish.
Because no. I saw that and I was like wondering if like the casters usually talk to the players, because I know they're all there anyway. So I just was wondering, like,
I mean, they 100% would have been like, I would be very surprised if none of them had like spoken to the players and whatever. So I would vouch for the fact that they had, even though I wasn't there.
I mean, yeah, and they're just like, they're people like us, so they're just like, they're very approachable. I feel like people understand, like people put these like pros in a huge pedestal where like they're above us, but to be honest, they're just gamers like us. I feel like they're just infinitely better than us. That's the only thing that's the difference.
Yeah, you also find that like, when you're working in the same environment as these people, there are always going to be ones who you gravitate towards as a friend. Like there are players that I'm friends with, and there are players who I may never be friends with, but like the next caster along might be friends with them or whatever. And so like they might sort of like go to those people that they already have that rapport with. And so it's not even like you have to really go bother people that you don't know. But I think also like, yeah, there are always going to be players who aren't super talkative. They're not like super approachable or receptive or whatever. But in general, people are happy to, and especially if it's for a a tournament or whatever, they know it's something that provides value. So, players are pretty good at knowing what they can't say. It's more just about how willing they are to talk. And I would say that in general, it's fine.
Yeah, I feel like because they always see that because they see like the pros through Twitter, and that they see the perspective of how they tweet and all that. They see it through Twitter, but they don't actually speak to them in person, which they're completely different people. Like, I feel like sometimes on Twitter, they just put on like not a face, but they have to put on like a standard of who they are. But I feel like when you talk to them, they're like one of the most chillest people you'll ever talk to. And like, you understand that they're just human like us, and they have mistakes, they have flaws. But like, then you'll see a Reddit thread of like, why is FNS like so angry? And it's like, he's a human being as well. And like, if a pro's complaining, it's like, they're human as well. They have emotions, so they have a right to complain.
I mean, I think emotion from players is a really good thing. I think one really grounding thing is just, if you ever see something in esports that you're either confused by or you think is strange or you don't understand, close your eyes and imagine it happening in a traditional sport. And if it makes sense there, then maybe that kind of should be translated. And I think that while I think it's good that esports has differences from traditional sports and it is its own thing, like it can't really be treated as if it is directly the same thing, because it's not, it never will be. But ultimately, it is sports in the sense that it is a platform for high level competition. And so those same reactions and emotions and, feelings are gonna be the same. Like, they're gonna be there. And I think the big difference is that in esports, you have a much closer connection to these players because they may also be streamers. You follow them on social media and they interact. Like, it's a lot more parasocial in the sense that you don't have a huge gap between them and you. And that's why sometimes I think it can feel a bit grating to people because they're so much closer to those feelings. But it's the same thing. It's the same reason that people feel that way. Like, they want to be the best in the world, and there are a lot of emotions that come with competing.
Yeah. So you definitely worded that perfectly again. And I feel like it's just definitely good, like people having like people like you and like others like really explain that and really emphasize that. Because again, I feel like esports is like, it's still a very young thing. It's not really that old as a thing. I feel like it's still very
decades
young.
Old at this time, at this point. But esports as a corporate thing that is
very young.
That's young.
Yeah, I know esports has been around for a minute, like Halo, like Quake, and all that. Like, I understand
but even
that.
like I think like the first esports tournament was in the 80s.
Yeah, so there's always like it goes back all the way then, so it's also important. And I feel like people don't, like it's definitely has still strides it needs to grow, and it's taken strides to grow. For example, like what Riot's doing, and like different events for males and females, and then like showing coaches, there's one-on-one coaches, there's giving casters more of a emotion. Than like, I feel like back then casters, you don't really know who they were, but I feel like now then, like, you understand who casters are through, I think, Twitter or YouTube. Like, casters are content creators as well, so I feel like people don't understand that, and that's one way to show who they really are. And it's really nice to see, because before, like, I couldn't name you like I grew up watching CS:GO. Like, CS:GO was my bread and butter, and I couldn't tell you like who was my real like favorite casters. But for Valorant, like, I'm seeing like you guys, I'm seeing like Tanner Metro, I'm seeing like Golden Boy, like I'm seeing all these guys like casters, and I'm like, I know they're like down to earth, like they're very chill people. And like now it's really good to see that Valorant's actually putting an emphasis on that as well, or Riot's putting an emphasis on that. Which,
I mean, what I will say to that is, like, casters making content and interacting and being part of the community, that's less an infrastructural thing and more personal decisions down to the casters. And there will always be people who don't do that because they don't want to, and that's their prerogative. But like that might be a slight cultural thing where it's become more normal, but ultimately that's down to the individuals. So, when you see people like, I I mean, you just mentioned Mitch, but Tom just put out a video with Neil Zenio today, like him making content. Yinsu does a lot of interview content. Obviously Sideshow, Bala, these are examples. I obviously do content, but I'm not here to shout out myself. But like,
no, it's okay. It's shame plug.
when you see people like that doing content, it's because they want to and have chosen to. It's not really because there's any authority above them that's encouraged them to do that.
Yeah. But it's also like there's no negative to it as well. So for a caster just making a name for themselves,
no,
and really
it makes them super valuable.
Yeah,
I personally think it's good to feel like you have a connection to the audience. And for me, as a fan, I usually find that I become more invested in figures in the community, including broadcast talent, who make that effort to have a connection with the community as well. Like those are usually the people I am drawn to as well as a fan. So like I can kind of see it from both sides, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. So it's always nice to see all that. And I feel like definitely Valorant. Valorant's very small, and esports, like company wise, like as a company, is very young. And I feel like they're definitely going through, I feel like they're maturing faster than I expected, in my opinion. I don't know if you can agree on that.
What, esports as a whole, as an industry?
It is definitely maturing, but of course, there's always flaws. There's always bad apples within every industry, no matter what. But there's also the good ones, and I feel like a lot of them. There's mostly good ones, especially in esports. Like,
I think esports has had to go through a lot of maturation. I think 2020 was a good example of that, and the sort of social issues that came up there. But it's interesting because I'm going to draw a comparison here. I used to be really involved in like normal YouTube, right? Like vlogger world, like back here from about 2011 to 2015. And back then, like that was when that first started getting big and being taken seriously. And so it was in a similar stage of life to what you could say esports has been over the last 5 years. And I remember that same period happening in the world of vlogging. And so when it came and happened in esports, I remember thinking, it's unfortunate, but it feels almost like not rite of passage, but it's something that it has to go through. Because when something has been built from a generally grassroots thing and has started to become corporate and there's money in it, that's where you then have to go through a period where you purge those bad apples, because there's no one to kind of audit those bad people in the beginning, because it's not an industry, it's just a bunch of people, right? So there's always going to be that period of time where stuff like that comes up, and it goes through what feels like a really difficult time, but it's sort of inevitable. And I don't think that obviously makes it a bad industry or makes it full of bad people or anything like that. And I think you're right, that it's been maturing. I think the interesting thing with where esports is right now is in the last few years, esports has been inflated a lot by VC money. And now we're kind of getting to that point where things need to become profitable to a point where we can continue to be have investment and stuff like that. And there is the risk that if that doesn't happen in the next couple of years, then there will be a bubble that bursts, because there won't be money that comes in to invest from external sources, and we won't be able to generate our own money in order to maintain where it is now. So we've kind of been in a bit of a golden era the last couple of years, where there has been such an influx of investment and we've been able to ride on it. So that's what I'm kind of looking for in esports as a whole now, is just sort of like, can we maintain that? And I think that socially progressing, i.e. going through the like Me Too movement that happened in 2020 and going through some of these things over the last couple of years, is a necessity in order to maintain the health of esports long term going forward, and to ensure that we can continue to have people who want to invest and become a bigger thing and a bigger part of the world's culture.
For sure. And I think that's perfect, whatever he said as well. And yeah, I feel like we're definitely going down the right path. Of course, we have some we definitely have growing to do, and I feel like we are definitely going on the right path. But I think that we are towards the end of the podcast, and we have a traditional question. I don't know if you know about.
Okay, no.
So, do you know what boba is? Do you? I know we've had previous guests in
bubble
England.
Tea? Like
bubble
boba?
tea, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, have you had it before? That's question number one.
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
I love it.
Because we've had George get us on. He said he's never tried it and he hated it. So
he's never tried it, but he hates it.
Yeah, he's like, nah, I'm not trying it.
How can he hate it if he's never tried it?
I don't know. We've had him twice, and we asked him twice, and he said no. And we're like,
all right, well, I'm gonna take George out in London, and I'm gonna make him get bubble tea with me, and
we'll force him out, please.
Yeah.
So another question is, what is your go-to boba order? Like, you go in, you're like, that's my favorite order.
I always get the same. I will always get strawberry milk bubble tea. With no tapioca, because I hate tapioca. It's disgusting.
Really?
I get it with, it's gross. But I get it with like the little juice balls that you can have. And I'll get like the little, I get the little strawberry juice balls with the strawberry milk. And then I usually get cream on top.
Wait, that's actually such an interesting one.
I really want bubble tea.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, no, that is my absolute favorite. I get it everywhere. And there's in London, in Chinatown, there is one alley that is just bubble tea places. And everyone has their favorite bubble tea place that's down that alley. Obviously, there's like a million other bubble tea places elsewhere, but like specifically in that alley. And the one that I like the best is actually one of the quieter ones, but they do a really, really good strawberry milk bubble tea.
Okay, because we've had somebody else who he's like the YouTube manager for Sentinels, and we've had him on, and he's like, yeah, bubble tea is not that huge in the UK or London compared to America. Compared to America, he said it's not that big.
I haven't noticed the particular difference. I think it's equal. I think it's
really there's just as much in London and like the UK compared to because the previous two people that we had, that's George and Apezo, that's the YouTube manager for Sentinels. We've asked them both, and they're like, "Yeah, it's not that really that big in the UK." And I'm like,
"Yeah, but if neither of them drink, if George doesn't fucking drink the shit, and he's trying to tell you whether it's popular in the UK, what is this?"
Yeah, no, yeah, this was like half a year ago, so we asked him then. So I don't know if he's actually tried it since.
He's an idiot.
You definitely need to like force him out and take it, because we told him to try it, and he's like, maybe. He gave us a maybe, and I'm like, dude, you can't just say maybe. You have to say yes or no to us.
Dude, so now I'm mad because like I would really like some right now, but it's Sunday evening, and I'm kind of like, if I go to the place, it's not going to be open, is it? Because it's Sunday evening, so.
Oh, really? I think for us, usually all boba places, they always close like at 8 p.m. around us.
Yeah, but I mean the specific place I want. You know what? I'm going to Google it.
Yeah.
Okay, let me see.
Because specifically the state I'm in, it's like boba central, because I live near New York City as well.
It's open to 9:30 p.m.
There you go. You have about
wrong.
You got like 4 hours before you got to go get them.
4.5 hours.
So you got time. Yeah, I don't know how far it is from your place, but yeah.
No, I live really central, so it's like it would take me not long to get.
All right, perfect. But again, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming on. This has been really like a really good episode, and thank you. You've like very educational as well in a sense. Thank you so much. I never
shut up on podcasts. So.
No, this is good. We love it.
You appreciate it.
Is it? Of course, if you want, you can promote anything. If you have any handles you want to promote, if you have any future projects or any events you're going to, if you want to promote that, you're more than welcome to right now if you'd like.
I won't necessarily make any comments about future events or anything like that, but I will say check out my YouTube channel, because I make a lot of Valorant content. I'm actually about to upload something as soon as we get off this podcast. Yeah. So it is youtube.com/geometric with the X in the middle. I'm sure you can put a link somewhere. I really hate people are like, so why do you use that? It's like, honestly, I just go with it. Like, I don't like it, but it is what it is. I put a lot of content about the Valorant competitive scene on there. So yeah.
Alrighty. Thank you guys. Appreciate you guys for listening. Check her out. Wonderful caster. Alrighty, guys. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.